Before we begin, hit subscribe and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support keeps these stories alive. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always glad to see how far these videos travel. The prairie was a vast silence broken only by the wind, a restless breath sweeping across endless grass. A storm leaned heavy on the horizon, clouds bruised purple and gold, the light of a dying sun spilling through like fire through cracks in an old lantern. Out of that lonely wilderness came Elias Boone, a man carved of weather and years, his boots dragging through the dust as if each step carried the weight of something unspoken. In his arms lay a woman, limp as a broken willow, her braid whipping in the wind like a banner of another world. He held her carefully, almost reverently, as though the smallest shift might shatter what fragile breath remained within her chest. Her dress, stitched with beads that caught the thin strands of fading sunlight, was torn and damp with river water. Elias had pulled her from the current not an hour before, her horse dead on the bank, arrows scattered in the mud like the remnants of some unseen battle. He had not meant to be near the river that day. His cattle had strayed too far, and duty dragged him where his heart no longer cared to wander. Yet fate placed him at the edge of the water, where her hand reached once and fell limp before he seized it. Elias had long been a man apart. Folks in town said his silence was a curse, that a man who kept so much to himself must surely be hiding sins darker than the desert nights. He knew what they whispered behind whiskey glasses and church doors. His wife had left years back, carrying her laughter to some far city, leaving only the sound of doors slamming in his memory. His ranch was a brittle patch of earth, good for little more than dust and solitude. Still, he endured. Endurance was all he had left. But now, with the weight of this woman in his arms, endurance felt different. It carried urgency, something close to defiance. He trudged across the prairie, not toward the town where wagging tongues might see, but toward his ranch, hidden among a scatter of cottonwoods. His revolver shifted against his hip, but for once it felt less like protection and more like a promise he hoped not to keep. Behind him, faint on the wind, he imagined hooves. Perhaps pursuit, perhaps only thunder. He did not look back. When he reached his cabin, he laid her down upon a bed that had known no warmth in years. The old wood creaked beneath her, the sound startling in the hush. Elias worked clumsily, boiling water, tearing cloth, his rough hands turned awkwardly gentle. He cleaned the wound at her temple, whispered low as though the words could anchor her soul. Stay, just a little longer. Her lashes fluttered once, and dark eyes opened, unfocused, clouded with pain. She saw him, the lines of his face, the dust in his hair, the guarded sorrow in his gaze. Fear flickered there, then softened. Her lips parted, but no words came. He lifted a tin cup, tilted water against her mouth, and she drank with effort, trembling. That small act of trust slipped into the space between them, fragile as spun glass. He did not ask her name. She did not ask his. Names, at that moment, seemed too heavy. Outside, the storm broke. Rain hissed on the roof, the prairie darkened, and the night seemed to close in around them. Elias sat on the porch, revolver resting across his knees, eyes never leaving the wavering line of horizon. He knew enough of the world to understand what he had invited upon himself. This woman was no ordinary wanderer. She was dressed with care, adorned in colors and beads that spoke of rank, of meaning, of belonging to people who would not let her vanish unnoticed. Her kin would come, and when they did, they would find her in the keeping of a man they had every reason to distrust. He lit no lamp, only listened to the storm and the faint breath of the woman within. In the quiet, he felt both dread and something he had nearly forgotten, purpose. Hours passed in that uneasy stillness. Each gust of wind across the grass sounded like riders drawing near, each roll of thunder a warning drum. He imagined what the town would say if they knew Elias Boone, sheltering a tribal princess beneath his roof. Some would call him a fool, others a traitor. None would understand that he had simply chosen not to let her die. Toward midnight, her voice came, soft, carried on weakness yet steady enough to reach him where he Saturday. Why? He did not answer at once. His eyes searched the storm, his hands tightened on the revolver. Then, in the slow cadence of a man unused to speech, he said, because no one else would. The rain eased, leaving the world damp and trembling. Inside, she closed her eyes again, but this time not in surrender. Elias remained on the porch, staring at the horizon, waiting for the sound of hooves that he knew, sooner or later, would find him. And when they did, the true weight of his choice would begin. The morning came with a hush that felt heavier than night. Mist curled low over the prairie, blurring the horizon, and Elias Boone stood in the yard with his hat pulled low, the weight of waiting pressed hard against his chest. He had slept none, though his body ached for it. Inside the cabin, the woman, Ayanna, he had learned from the soft murmur of her dreams, rested beneath his worn quilt. She had risen once in the dark to sip more water, her hand brushing his in the act, and though no words passed, he felt the nearness of something fragile blooming. Now, the stillness before dawn was broken by the faint tremor of hooves. The sound grew until it rolled like thunder across the earth. Elias squared his shoulders, eyes narrowing against the mist. From the vale of morning, they came, warriors astride painted horses, their faces set in grim silence. Spears glinted, bows hung at their sides, feathers trembling in the wind. At their center rode a man whose bearing spoke of command, his hair streaked with silver, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. This was Tahu, chief of the people whose blood tied them to Ayanna. The riders halted, their horses stamping the damp earth. For a long heartbeat, the world held still. Elias felt the sweat on his palms though the air was cool, the revolver at his hip heavier than it had ever been. He did not draw. He only stood, a lone rancher before a wall of judgment. The chief dismounted, his steps deliberate, his silence louder than any war cry. His eyes cut to the cabin door where Ayanna stirred and stepped out, her movements slow, her body still weak yet holding a grace that made the air shift. She leaned against the post, the blanket draped across her shoulders. At the sight of her, the warriors bowed their heads faintly, reverence flickering in the sternness of their gaze. "She lives," Tahu said, his voice low, carrying the weight of authority. He studied Elias with a scrutiny that stripped away pretense. "And she lives in your keeping." Elias's jaw tightened. He gave a nod, nothing more. Words seemed a fragile shield in a moment like this. Ayanna's voice broke the tension, soft but steady. "He carried me from death. Without him, I would be gone to the river." The declaration settled over them like rain on dry earth. Some of the warriors shifted, surprise in their eyes. Tahu's expression did not change, though his silence deepened. At last, he stepped forward until he stood near enough that Elias could see the weathering lines carved into his face. "You have taken a life from the river," the chief said. "Our law binds us. A life saved must be honored, debt repaid not with silver, not with words, but with blood or bond." Elias frowned, uncertain of the meaning, but before he could ask, Tahu continued, his gaze unflinching. "You are not friend to our people, yet you carried her when others would have turned away. For this, we offer protection. And more, we offer that she remains bound to you. Her fate, her breath, now walks with yours." The words struck Elias harder than any bullet. He looked at Ayanna, expecting refusal, but she did not flinch. Her eyes found his, steady, unashamed. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of two souls bruised by solitude. "I need no payment," Elias said at last, voice rough as gravel. "I did what was right." Tahu's reply was firm. "A man cannot choose the weight of honor once it is given. You will carry it, whether you wish it or not." The warriors murmured in agreement, the sound like the wind sweeping dry grass. Elias felt the eyes of the tribe upon him, measuring not the strength of his arms but the truth of his silence. He thought of the town, of the saloon whispers and the shame that clung to his name. Here, among strangers, his act was not scorned but sanctified. Ayanna straightened, though her body trembled with weakness. "You think yourself unworthy," she said quietly, so only he and the chief heard. "But you carried me when the world turned its back. That is worth more than you believe." The words pierced deeper than any accusation. Elias lowered his head, removing his hat in a gesture older than speech. He felt his chest tighten, not with dread this time, but with something perilously close to hope. Tahu nodded once, as though some silent agreement had been sealed. The warriors began to turn their horses, their shadows stretching long across the wet earth. Ayanna remained at the porch, her eyes still fixed on Elias, and in them he saw not gratitude alone, but an invitation to something he had not known in years: belonging. The morning sun broke through the mist, flooding the prairie with sudden gold. Elias stood rooted, caught between the life he had endured and the life now rising before him. For the first time, the horizon did not seem empty. It seemed to call. And with that call came the truth. The choice he had made beside the river was only the beginning.